Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. So first, a government attack on nature. That's how wildlife charities are reacting this afternoon to policies that could see house builds and commercial development in large swathes of the countryside. Now, many charities are worried the plans could threaten protected habitats and put clean air, water and national wellbeing at risk. Well, councils have until Friday to apply to host an investment zone that the government says will also benefit from tax incentives and wider support for the local economy, and will be granted after a rapid selection process. So, what are we talking about? Well, new planning laws and investment zones were announced on Friday, the 23rd of September. That was all during the mini-budget. Now, the zones will have liberalised planning laws to increase house building and commercial development. Now, they'll grant tax breaks such as business rates and stamp duty tax relief. And the 24 investment zones can be applied for in areas including designated greenbelt areas, national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. Now, the deadline for councils to apply to host an investment zone is on Friday. Well, joining us now is Sky's political chief correspondent, John Craig. John, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about those plans, because wildlife charities, former Tory ministers and millions of ordinary people, they're concerned.
There's real anger in the countryside, not just from wildlife groups. Yes, the former minister who's been most vocal in her opposition is Rebecca Powell, who was a minister at DEFRA until a few weeks ago. Now there's opposition to fracking as well, but there is particular alarm at those proposals to allow potentially investment zones to grow in the areas like the national parks, for example. Now, that has drawn a rebuff from the government. They insist, yes, investment zones are a good thing and will boost growth, but they will not damage the environment. In a statement to Sky News, the government said this: investment zones will deliver the growth, jobs and housing that communities want and need. They're not being imposed by the government. We're empowering local places to deliver plans that are right for their area. We will not be downgrading the strong and established protections for national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty and protected sites. National Greenbelt policy will continue to apply, and all proposals must have consent from local planners or national park authorities. Those that do not will not be taken forward and cannot become an investment zone. But there is alarm. There's alarm also at the government's threat to get rid of what Liz Truss called in her Tory conference speech, EU red tape on wildlife measures, for example. Yesterday in the Sunday Times, the National Trust Chief, that's Hilary McGrady, accused Liz Truss of demonising conservationists, said her members were outraged and worried about the threat posed by the new government's policies.
John, it's such an interesting story, isn't it? Also, though, there are comments from Downing Street saying the Prime Minister, she doesn't want solar panels on farmland. I don't know about you, but it feels like the environment is becoming, I suppose, a flashpoint for Liz Truss at the moment.
It's becoming a real political battle zone, because Liz Truss has never been a fan of wind farms. Now, today, Number 10 has said that they want to encourage long-term energy and food security. We're looking at regulation and investment, the impacts farmers to make sure our projects boost food production and protect the environment. The PM has spoken about this previously, said Number 10, which she certainly has. Back in 2014, when she was Environment Secretary, she called solar farms a blight on the landscape. And throughout the hustings in the summer, she was bitterly critical of wind farms on agricultural land, saying that food production should take priority. OK. John, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Well, let's hear from someone who feels these investment zones could benefit their local area.
I think we'd be looking to open up sites that do exist in Barrow that have been undeveloped for some considerable period of time, and that will help to draw in investment and companies into the area. Where we, I think, have some concerns is around if there were to be wholesale relaxation of environmental planning rules, and I think we'd want to look at that very carefully once we get the detail of exactly what's being proposed. Depending on what comes back, that there may be some red lines that unfortunately might mean that we weren't able to take this process forward. But we'd very much hope that that wouldn't be the case. And indeed, I think, there's an argument that local authorities ought to be given more power and flexibility to make these decisions themselves, rather than it being a one-size-fits-all from central government in Whitehall.
Well, the wildlife trusts have been front and centre in their voicing their concerns about these investment zones and criticising the government for not doing enough to keep their commitments to the environment. Well, I'm joined now by their Director of Public Affairs and Marine Conservation, Joan Edwards. Joan, thanks so much for joining us on the Daily Climate Show. You would have heard the councillor there. Local people might want that investment, but you're concerned about the impact on the environment.
Yeah, we're really concerned that there's little or no regard for nature conservation in these zones. And in fact, some of these sites might contain SSSIs or national nature reserves, or even be in the green belt or on national parks. And we need to make sure in the future that these investment zones don't take away the rules that protect our nature.
And Joan, you might have seen that the RSPB are saying that they're not ruling out direct action to the government policy. What will you be telling your members?
Well, I'm not sure the RSPB would do direct action. That's not something us NGOs do. But we are calling on all our members to write to their MPs, write to their local councillors and say, we're not anti-growth. The Wildlife Trusts are not anti-growth, but growth should happen without damaging the environment.
And Joan, I'd like to get your thoughts on, there are some people that are saying that these plans are sort of pitting the growth of the economy against the environment. What do you think?
Well, as I said, you can have growth and you can have nature. We face a climate crisis. We face a nature crisis. 41% of species in the UK are in decline. 15% of our species face extinction. The government only a year ago published the Environment Act. In that, they said they wanted to bring species back by 2030. And yet, at the same time, they're ripping up the rules that protect our nature.
Their biggest argument, the government will be saying that they're handing the power to local communities to make sure that they can grow their own economies. And they will say during the cost of living crisis, that's really important.
Well, the government's asked for local authorities to put expressions of interest in by Friday. I'm sorry, when you have a consultation that's quick, local people won't be involved. They might not even speak to landowners. This is a very rushed, not thought out approach. And to be honest, these are the sort of things where mistakes can be made. And we don't want to see peatland or marsh or wildfire meadows being destroyed in these investment zones.
And very briefly, Joan, what do you want to see happen? What would you like to see happen?
We want to make sure the rules that we have to protect nature stay there, that there is no weakening, and that if we have investment zones, any protected sites or protected species in the investment zones will get the right protection they deserve.
OK, Joan Edwards from the Wildlife Trust, thank you very much for your time. And just before we go, we'd like to bring you that news from Scotland then, that Scotland's First Minister pledged to make Aberdeen the net zero capital of the world. In her speech at the SNP party conference in the city, Nicola Sturgeon went on to announce that the first 22 projects from the country's Just Transition Fund have received more than £50 million of funding, and that fund is a 10-year commitment from the Scottish Government to support initiatives in the region which will help the transition to net zero.
These projects will support the production of green hydrogen, the development of wave and tidal technology, and even pioneer the use of waste from whisky to recycle EV batteries. They will focus on the skills our existing workforce need to take advantage of the renewables revolution.
That's all from us today.